European Union leaders have announced about a 93 billion rand investment package in South Africa to support green energy transition and vaccine production. Yesterday, European Union leaders were in Cape Town for the first South Africa-European Union Summit since 2018. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen says the investment is mutually beneficial for Europe and South Africa. Now, both South Africa and the EU are grappling with aid and trade issues as US President Donald Trump withdraws assistance and imposes tariffs. To look at significance of the summit, we are joined by the head of the African Governance and Diplomacy Program at the South African Institute of International Affairs, Stephen Gruzd. Stephen, thank you for joining us. Great to have you.
Great, thanks for having me, Leyen.
I mean, this is really an opportune time, I imagine, for refreshing the relationship between South Africa and the European Union. I mean, even while the summit was happening, we heard the US President Donald Trump firing shots at the EU, now imposing like 200% tariff increases on wines and champagnes or whatever the case may be. So this is a very, very important time.
Yes, indeed. I think both South Africa and the European Union have been on the wrong end of Trump's rhetoric and his very frenetic activity in the first 50 days or so of him taking office. And indeed, you know, South Africa has been in his sights, and there's been the withdrawal of aid, and Europe has also similarly been the target of Trump, especially on defense, saying that they need to pay more for defense and not rely so heavily on the United States to defend them, as has been the case for the last 80 years. So he's really turned things on their head quite quickly.
Yeah.
And when his executive order against South Africa came out a few weeks ago, the Europeans were quick to support South Africa, to support our presidency of the G20, and that it all goes smoothly. So I think within the global realignments and what's happening, this is an important summit. It's an important photo opportunity and an opportunity for South Africa and the EU to cement their ties and do what's best for the two regions.
And very importantly so, because I mean, I imagine that on both sides, as we see this United States tariff war happening, and it's with everybody, but we as a country can fill a lot of those gaps. I mean, when you sort of see that the products on offer on this side and also from the EU side, you know, it's important to look elsewhere, and I think that is what the US president is actually forcing the world to do.
Yes, everybody's diversifying. They're having to find new supply chains, new customers, new investment. I think South Africa has been a big proponent of South-South trade with other developing countries. This, of course, is South-North. But nevertheless, the European Union is our largest trading partner, taken as a bloc, larger than China. And once you have already a steady stream of trade, it's much easier to build on that and to increase it. So indeed, South Africa will be looking to diversify its sources of products, of materials, of clients, and the European Union presents a very good market. It's not always easy to get into it. For example, we've had a lot of problems over the years with our citrus, with black spot disease, and many say that the European health standards are too stringent and are in fact trade barriers. So there are things that need to be worked out. But yes, Europe is a very lucrative and attractive market for South Africa, and I think the other way around as well.
Very importantly. So let's have a look and see what some of the nitty-gritties that came out of this yesterday, and again, keeping the United States in the background, because it is. I mean, it is an important partner in everything. We saw the US pull out of climate funding deals to help developing countries transition to clean energy, and one of the main beneficiaries of which was South Africa. So now we see yesterday that there's been this commitment from the EU to give South Africa 93 billion rand in investment, and this is for green energy and also for vaccination and whatever else. Perhaps you can tell us a little bit more on this. So this obviously picking up the shortfall of what we can see being lost from the US. Is this correct?
So I haven't done the sum, so I'm not sure that it's an exact like for like, but certainly the environment is very important to the European Union, combating climate change, etc., and helping South Africa transition from using fossil fuels like oil and gas into more green technologies like hydro and wind and solar. It has been a big plank of European Union's policy for a long time. So I think we don't really know the details of what that 4.7 billion euro is exactly going to cover. I expect some of it will be a boost for the just energy transition, as it's called, because the US did pull out, and I don't think Europe wants that to collapse. But, you know, have they absolutely plugged the hole? I'm not sure.
Okay. How is this going to work? I mean, we see the US's negative stance towards this. I mean, pulling out of green energy, and US President Donald Trump has not held this as a secret. He's right out there saying that he's not interested in this. He wants to grow industry. You've got the EU trying really hard. They have a massive commitment to this energy transition, obviously influencing countries like South Africa, who are very small in terms of our emissions and what we do in a global context. Ours is very, very small. Without the US a part of all of this, I mean, we talk about their Paris Climate Accord. They don't want to be a part of this anymore. How is this going to affect the world? And, you know, should South Africa financially be looking in this direction when we really should be looking at creating jobs and finding sectors that work for us as opposed to not?
Yeah, very worrying. The US has indeed given notice of pulling out of the Paris Climate Accord. Just the other day, they lifted restrictions on people having to do environmental assessments in the States. Trump has famously said, drill, baby, drill. They are going to drill for oil without too much worry about the economic consequences. As you say, the developing world are not the biggest polluters, although South Africa is one of the biggest polluters, but generally they have contributed the least to climate change and are the most affected by it. Yeah, you know, I don't think there's an alternative, but now you have the biggest player, one of the biggest economy in the world, saying it's not interested. And how does that affect the whole of humanity? Climate is not something that respects borders and is not going to behave differently. But if the efforts to reverse climate change is not universal, and one of the biggest polluters is continuing to do so, it really puts the multilateral system in jeopardy. And South Africa and the EU are both very committed to multilateralism, to countries working together in simple terms.
So let's have a look at other issues. I mean, also the whole issue of scrapping US aid. This is another thing, and South Africa being very adversely affected by this, and the rest of the continent, and a lot of countries in the world. I mean, the EU, are they able to step up and assist in any way?
I think they will try, but indeed, with the collapsing of US aid has been devastating for countries around the world. South Africa less so, because we are not that dependent on aid generally, and most of the American funding that was coming into South Africa was for HIV/AIDS. I mean, it's very serious for some people on antiretrovirals who are going to have to make an alternative plan. But the collapse of USAID, or the destruction of USAID, is extremely serious. I was sent a message on my phone with a list of hundreds of pages of all of the projects that have been stopped around the world. Ones that cost $40 and ones that cost $400 million, and everything in between. I don't think the EU has enough in its coffers to fill the gap that USAID has the gap that USAID will leave. Yeah. So that aid's gone. I don't think it's coming back, even if there's a new American administration. Yeah. Maybe it's good because it's a wake up for the rest of the world not to be so dependent on handouts. and to be more self-sufficient. But we're in for a rocky period, definitely over the next couple of years.
Without a doubt. I mean, aid agencies all over the world, no matter how wealthy or how poor it is, being very badly affected, and time is going to give us even a clearer picture of how bad the situation is. Let's talk geopolitical challenges, global security and stability. What are the potential benefits from an improved utilization of this relationship? Because obviously we've known South Africa's stance on Ukraine and the EU on all of this as well. We now see what the US are saying. We also saw that there's a possibility of a ceasefire, and yet that seemed to be thrown into a complete disarray yesterday. Perhaps talk to us about this and our stance on all of this.
Yeah, the tectonic plates of international politics are definitely shifting. I mean, who would have thought 2 months ago that the US would have been pushing so hard for a peace deal, which really looks to favor Russia? In Trump's parlance, they're holding the cards. The Europeans were very disappointed with South Africa in terms of not condemning Russia for the invasion. I think that is going to be put aside because they're both facing hostility from the White House. So I think you're going to see South Africa and the European Union working closer on that. But yes, the geopolitics is shifting. I don't think anybody knows which way it's going to go. There is a lot of pressure now on Zelensky and somewhat on Putin to come to the table. Putin's put a whole lot of conditions that he doesn't want the ceasefire because it would allow Ukraine to regroup and rearm. That Ukraine's going to have to give up the territories that Russia occupies, that Ukraine can never join NATO. All of these things are being discussed at the moment. But I think we shouldn't dismiss how important a peace deal is. And it has been a terrible war that has killed hundreds of thousands of people, displaced millions of people in the heart of Europe. So I think South Africa and the EU will be very supportive of a deal, but it looks to me like Zelensky is being really squeezed and is going to have to give up a lot for very uncertain security guarantees, if any.
All right, Stephen, well, unfortunately I have to leave it there. I wanted to quiz you on some of the African issues as well, and where South Africa can come in with EU-African relationships. But, that's a big one and a big conversation perhaps for another day. Stephen, thank you. Thanks for talking to us. Stephen Gruzd is the head of the African Governance and Diplomacy Program at the South African Institute of International Affairs, speaking about the South Africa European Union Summit. This is where we saw a commitment of a lot of money from the EU to South Africa, but that mostly that 93 billion rand. You'll hear more about it in our news at green energy transition and vaccine production.